So obviously the media landscape now is insane, and people are doing more and more crazy things just to get your attention.
Minors!
And I feel like comedians can often feel like they have to do the same thing, and it's very embarrassing.
And I was working for the marketing division for a retarded person, okay?
But Kyle Canain, he does the opposite. He'll take stories from everyday life, boring, mundane things, just about going to the shops or something, and he can make that stuff epic, funny, and even kind of poetic in a way. And I personally think that is a good thing. I like how he does that. Kyle Canain grew up as a punk kid in Illinois. He's talked about how as a kid he thought he was very cool, but has sort of grown up to realize that maybe that wasn't the truth.
We know subconsciously we're all fucking losers, but yet we're having the best time of our life because we're complaining about being losers. We're not really doing anything to change it.
At university, or college as they call it in America, he studied creative writing, and he would write funny stories in class. But that background in creative writing explains a lot about his style. You know, he cares about word choice, his descriptions can feel literary, and he'll find philosophy in some of the dumbest corners of life. And there's this concept of the great American novel, which is sort of a nebulous thing that you can't really pin down. I feel like Kyle Canain's stand-up feels like the stand-up equivalent of the great American novel. He's talked about how his favourite writer is Poe Ballantine, who personally I actually don't know very much about. But when I looked into him, it makes a lot of sense that this would be Kyle's favourite writer. They both manage to find ways of making the everyday seem epic. They both rely heavily on self-deprecation. Both of them have a love for weird, eccentric people, and they can find philosophy in sort of weird places. You know, Kyle can talk about simple things like being drunk or going to Taco Bell or something, and suddenly pivot this into an observation about aging and loneliness. In both cases, the audience gets more than they signed up for. But while Poe will use these kind of observations to construct narrative arcs for novels, Kyle will use the structural forms of comedy and like solid joke writing techniques to spin these observations into killer stand-up routines. So I kind of want to dive into probably what's my favourite Kyle story. It's called Campaigner. It's from his album Trampoline in a Ditch. On paper, this story is rubbish. Basically, the beats of the story are Kyle goes out to buy cigarettes. A guy in a van sells him a Halloween decoration. He tries to use it to prank his friend. The prank doesn't work. That's it. There's no twist, no shocking ending, no Russian mafia. He's never shirtless when he tells it. But through Kyle's storytelling style, it's become my favourite of all of his routines. One of the key things about how Kyle will tell a story, and this is true of all of his routines, but it's especially true of Campaigner, is he'll share a story detail, go off on a tangent, share another story detail, go off on a tangent, bit more story, another tangent, back to the story, call back, wrap it all up. And it's in the tangents that he's able to find jokes, share his opinions, and create the comedy. The tangents kind of become the engine for the comedy of the routine. This is why he's able to take something so ordinary, like going to the shops to buy cigarettes, and within that find so many interesting observations and opinions about life and cigarettes. So I kind of wanted to look at how he'll find tangents and find comedy within those tangents.
I was going to buy cigarettes. I used to smoke a bunch, and I got up to about 2 packs a day, and I smoked Doral Lights. Were my favorite. There's a discount cigarette. Somebody right there just, ugh. Look at people openly disgusted. I think they're pronounced Doral, but I like saying Doral because it made them sound fancier. And why not? Self-esteem is free. You could just feel better about shit. But yeah, people would be grossed out by them too, which I don't understand. They're cigarettes. They're all disgusting. What do you need a name brand on your cancer for? It's all cancer. All of them. I only smoke American spirits. Good for you. You're paying too much for cancer.
So immediately, he'll go into more detail about things. He's not just going to buy cigarettes, he's going to buy Doral lights. This is a great example of a tangent growing from just one small, minor detail. And then in a classic Kyle way, his use of language shines through.
This weekend, my roommate was out of town for a few days. I'm like, all right, this is my weekend. I'm broke. I don't have a lot going on. I'm just going to smoke all the pot we have left, and that's going to be my weekend. I'm going to stock up on my Doral lights and sit around just watching TV. And so coming back from the cigarettes, walking the same way I did, but now in the way of the sidewalk is this van, this hurriedly parked van. Is across the side. It's kind of in a driveway, but like all jaunty, like one tire's in the grass, and some of it's still kind of hanging out in the street, like it was parked in a hurry.
I love the way he describes the van here. Like, this is so interesting. I feel like this goes against most conventional stand-up comedy writing wisdom. I feel like most people would tell you that this is fat and you can cut this. But for Kyle, it just works. It's his literary style. I can see the van in my mind. It's great. It's not funny. But again, I think he's laying the foundation for something that will be funny later.
Writing a joke that's about brevity and how effective you use your words. But I get into telling stories and telling yarns, and that's less on brevity and more on bullshit, where it's like you tell a story on Friday night and people laugh at it at a party. So then you tell it on Saturday night to a new group of people, and the colors get a little brighter. And the measurements get a little bit larger.
So you mean like it'll start off as small and basic, and then you start looking for details to then build the joke with?
Yeah, I mean, that's like when you enjoy reading literature or something. It's like, well, you could say, I walked up to the house. Or you could say, I walked up the narrow sidewalk to the house. Or you could say, I walked up the narrow sidewalk lined with tulips towards the house. I walked up the narrow sidewalk lined with tulips towards the orange house with the blue awnings. I thought that color choice was weird. Last time I saw blue with orange was the Bears, and I don't even like Chicago Bears football, but man, let me tell you about when they won the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl Shuffle, you ever hear that? That's a stupid song. You can veer off any way you want and make a joke out of any angle you want. It's your story.
So if you go to the shops, turn that into a story, write it down, and then look at every detail within that story and think about how you can describe it, what are your opinions about it, and how can you build off of these details to create observations and opinions that you could write jokes about.
So now I gotta walk around this van here, and as I get around the other side of the van where the sliding door is, but as I get just past that and I hear from inside the van, I just hear a man's voice go, "Hey man, you like Halloween?" Which that's a trick question, because the answer is yes, always yes. If the answer's ever no, get out of my life. I got no place for you.
And again, he's able to build in observations about Halloween, what his opinions are about Halloween, how he feels about Halloween. You see, it's like, and that's just from one line that a character in his story said. Another technique that Kyle uses often in his storytelling is something that Mike Birbiglia talks about all the time, which is that you share an event and then talk about how you felt about the event. One of the great things about that is there's kind of no limits to your own imagination. Oh, wow, what an interesting thing I've just said. But I just mean in terms of like, you can go in really absurd directions with jokes if you base those jokes on your imagination of events.
Great, because I got this stuffed dude, and he would be perfect for Halloween. 2 paths? Which one? Like a plush toy? Like a children's toy? Except it's a man, and that's strange. Here you go, my child. You know how you like unicorns and dragons and teddy bears? This is just a whole man made out of that same material. Or taxidermied human being. Which one? Which one? My eyes adjusted to the darkness inside the van. It was the first one. It was a full-size man. A stuffed animal man. And the guy was like holding him up by his shoulders like a friend that passed out, like he's trying to get up. This would be perfect for Halloween. I was like, it scared me. And then he goes, can you believe somebody was gonna throw this out? I'm like, absolutely. And then I realized this guy saw this thing peeking out of a trash can and was so enticed, he veered his van across traffic up onto someone's yard to dig it out. And And you know he didn't think it was the first thing. You know, I wonder if that's a life-size plush man that would be a great Halloween prop. He just saw maybe a fleshy foot out of the garbage can, like, ooh, I'm getting some reward money today.
And Kyle does this brilliantly throughout this bit. He's able to share a detail of the story, tell you how he felt about it in the moment, and then push it further by imagining other possible scenarios. And this helps to build the sort of weird, eccentric world of Kyle Canain's stand-up.
And I realized as I'm walking, I was like, oh, I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna hide this in Matt's bed. So when he comes home from his trip, he'll be mighty frightened. That's what I'll do to my friend. I'll take this dirty, maybe sex doll that a stranger found in the trash and sold to me for pennies on the dollar. And I'll put that under the clean sheets of someone I pretend to care about. We get back to the apartment. He's like, oh, maybe go get something to eat. I'm like, go take a nap. You want to take a nap? Let me get your bags. I'll get your bag. And I waited for him. He's walking down the hallway. And he opens his door. And he freezes just long enough for me to think, like, it worked. But it was only like a half a second before he just goes, the fuck is this? And my whole infrastructure collapsed. Like, I didn't even know how to respond. I was like, you like Halloween? Like that.
You know, on paper, this end of the story should be rubbish. It's an anticlimax. The prank doesn't work. It kind of goes nowhere. But he ties it together with a really nice callback. This is something that Stuart Lee talks about in his stand-up all the time, of how callbacks can give the illusion of structure and it makes the story feel more satisfying. But the trick with a Kyle Canain story is that the joy isn't in the destination. It's in the detour, guys, and that, fucking hell, that's profound. But ultimately, the thing I like most about Kyle Canain as a stand-up comedian is that he doesn't need to be offensive and controversial. He doesn't need wild pyrotechnics or a big animated screen behind him. He doesn't need to make up stories about the Russian mafia. He can find something mundane, layer in details, tangents, feelings, interesting language, and create these compelling, funny, profound stories just from everyday life. You know, he proves that you don't need to live an interesting life to be a funny comedian.